Hello and welcome to the National Security Conversations. With the abrogation of J&K special status, India-Pakistan relations have gone from bad to worse once again. Pakistan has complained to the United Nations Security Council against the Indian action in Jammu and Kashmir and has increased diplomatic heat on New Delhi. There are reports of terrorist plots against India and ceasefire violations have again gone up on the line of control. So what can we expect on the India-Pakistan front under these circumstances? To discuss this and more, I have with me Ambassador TCA Raghavan. Ambassador TCA Raghavan is the Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs. He was previously the Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan until December 2015. He headed the Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran division or PI division at the Ministry of External Affairs. Previously, he is a PhD from JNU. He has authored two books, a biography of two Mughal nobles and a study of India-Pakistan relations. Welcome to the National Security Conversations, Ambassador Raghavan. Ambassador Raghavan, would I be correct in arguing that by stating that Jammu and Kashmir is now a domestic issue, the government has taken it off the bilateral negotiating table between India and Pakistan? Or put differently, will there be a conversation between India and Pakistan on the Kashmir question anytime in future?
Well, I don't think a conversation on the Kashmir question has ever been ruled out with Pakistan. And where the question of Jammu and Kashmir being an internal issue, the fact is that this position is not a new one and it is not changed at all by the recent constitutional developments which have taken place. The fact is that this position was always part of the Indian position on this issue, and if you look back, there are many instances which illustrate that, and most specifically you have the Parliament resolution of 1994 which said that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. This was a joint resolution, both houses of Parliament, and even at that time people asked that why is this resolution necessary, because this in fact was already the government position. So in that sense I am not very sure as to why there is such a strong reaction in Pakistan to the recent constitutional changes, because this has always been the stated position of the government of India for a very long time, in fact going back to the early 1950s. Now, what is there to discuss with Pakistan on the question of Jammu and Kashmir? Again, that has also been a very clearly stated part of the government position.
In other words, you are saying that Kashmir is a domestic issue for India has always been the case.
Well, it has always been the case, but there is one proviso, because if you read the 1994 Parliament resolution, it also says that a part of Jammu and Kashmir is under the illegal occupation of Pakistan, and that Pakistan should vacate that aggression or that illegal occupation. So when you say that what will be the government's stated position on discussing Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan, there is always the question of Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which very much remains something to be discussed and something to be resolved.
So in other words, you are saying that if anything that needs to be discussed with Pakistan on the Kashmir question, it is the illegal occupation of Pakistan occupied
It is
Kashmir.
certainly one of the principal issues. Now, it is by no means, one cannot anticipate what government will say or do on this issue, but generally it has never been the case with in the government of India's position that we will not discuss any other issue with Pakistan. Regardless of what different political positions are, the fact that Pakistan borders Jammu and Kashmir, there will always be issues to discuss. For instance, as you have issues to discuss with regard to Punjab or with regard to Rajasthan, with regard to cross-border travel. So it is not as if we are not going to be discussing anything relating to Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan at all. But as far as the stated position of the government is, it has always been the case that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, and therefore discussions on its status in terms of political and constitutional status cannot be held with any other country.
So from a conflict resolution point of view, the conflict resolution in Jammu and Kashmir point of view, the government of India probably may not want to talk to Pakistan anymore. Like, say, for example, they did from the 2004-2007
No,
period.
it depends on what you mean by conflict resolution. If by conflict resolution one means building up cross-border linkages, multiplying cross-border confidence building measures, encouraging trade, people-to-people contact, cultural contacts, I don't see any issue which comes in the way of these discussions. But as far as discussing political and constitutional status is concerned, I think the position has not been changed by the recent legislative changes. That position was always part of the Government of India stand.
So, in response to this decision by India, Pakistan has downgraded the diplomatic engagement with India. It has approached the United Nations Security Council. So, what do you foresee happening from now on? Is it going to be more instability in the region, or is Pakistan going to take it in its stride and say, move on? What's likely to happen?
Frankly, I am perplexed at the Pakistani reaction because that they would react was to be expected, but that they would overreact to such an extent is certainly something perplexing, because if one goes by stated Pakistani positions, it is never as if they attached a great deal of importance to Article 370 or in fact to any constitutional provisions with regard to Jammu and Kashmir.
They called it a farce.
They called it a farce, they called it an illegal occupation, etc., etc. So why this sudden burst of energy? And to my mind, the explanation lies in something which has unfortunately been very much part of the India-Pakistan dynamic for the last 2.5 decades at least, is chronic instability in Pakistan. And I think there is a domestic dynamic which is driving Pakistan external policy at this stage, which is very difficult to predict what exactly will happen next.
So, what do you attribute to that domestic instability at this point of time in Pakistan?
To my mind, this extent of overreaction, and in particular sending the ambassador back on this issue, suggests that the current government is concerned about being outflanked by its opposition, and in particular by the next gen opposition. I think Imran Khan foresees some kind of a political threat emerging from the PPP and the PMLN under their new generation leaders, which is Bilawal Bhutto and Maryam Nawaz Sharif. And possibly he is working overtime to make sure he does not get caught out on this particular issue. And I think this is why he is expending so much energy into this, because as I said, some extent of reaction was to be expected. But this extent of overreaction is certainly perplexing.
At the same time, there seems to be a certain amount of political consensus, elite consensus within Pakistan. The army, the establishment, the political parties, the civil society, the opinion makers in Pakistan, they all seem to converge on the argument that, hey, what India has done in Kashmir vis-a-vis the 370 is not something that we like.
In Pakistan, they have always converged on the position. There has always been a broad consensus on the position that anything which India does on Kashmir is not acceptable. Okay. And for that, I think there is what underwrites opinion in Pakistan, both elite opinion and to an extent opinion on the street, is this great sense of entitlement, almost a proprietary instinct where Jammu and Kashmir is concerned. So that there is this superficial consensus which is visible is not surprising.
But in any case, as you correctly pointed out, if India has done something vis-a-vis Article 370 or the Kashmir Constitution, it has probably taken a leaf out of Pakistan's playbook. I mean, that's what Pakistan did with POK by separating Gilgit-Baltistan, etc.
And if you recall, our position has always been that we do not recognize the validity of any legislative changes which Pakistan may bring about with regard to Pakistan occupied Kashmir, whether what they call POK or Azad Jammu and Kashmir in particular or Gilgit-Baltistan. We make a political objection, we protest, but then because we do not recognize the validity of those changes, there is no reason to go into hyperdrive.
Interesting. So, you've dealt with the Pakistani state for a considerable period of time as the Joint Secretary in the PI division and as a High Commissioner to Pakistan. Knowing the Pakistani state for what it is, to the extent that you do, what do you expect the Pakistani state to do now, the deep state in particular? Will it increase more heat on Pakistan in material military terms? Will it increase terrorist attacks on India? What do you expect?
Well, the threat of terrorism is certainly ever present, given the internal dynamics in Pakistan. And you cannot correlate them or relate them directly to anything which is happening in political terms. It's not as if because of this the threat of terrorism is terrorist attack is more, because it is not as if the threat of terrorist attack, as in fact recent developments bring out, has been less. I think so. We have to be very much on our guard where security issues are concerned.
How do you foresee Chinese reactions to what has happened vis-a-vis Jammu and Kashmir, given the fact that Amit Shah in his statement said that Aksai Chin is also part of India?
But that has again always been India's position.
Talking about Jammu and Kashmir, talking about Pakistan, and then talking about China in the same breath, did you open another front?
I don't think he opened another front. He was speaking in Parliament. Right. And when you speak in Parliament, you have to be bound by what the Constitution says. And I think it was in that context he was only reiterating what has been a long-standing Indian position. Now, as far as the question of Kashmir vis-a-vis China, this is something which has been under discussion with them for a long time, and I think both sides recognize each other's stated positions quite clearly. So it is not as if this legislative change makes any difference as far as any external boundary is concerned, whether it's the line of control or the line of actual control vis-a-vis China.
No, my point is not about the merit of what Amit Shah said. As you correctly pointed out, he's speaking in the parliament, so there's a stated position. He's obviously going to repeat that. But I'm asking, what implications will it have for, say, Sino-Indian border negotiations, or will China go on talking about Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh? What impact will it have on the substance of the Sino-Indian negotiations? That's what I'm trying to get.
But you have to ask someone who is an expert on the India-China border. In my reckoning, it will not have any implication at all, because what has really been done is been said is a restatement of an existing position, which itself is quite an old position. It's not a new position.
Right. But so given the relationship that China shares with Pakistan, which is a pretty strong one, a strategic one, how far will China help out Pakistan? Now, clearly China has helped Pakistan in sort of getting this issue into the UN Security Council, etc. But how far will they go? How far will they know? What would be the red line beyond which the Chinese will not go? Because they also probably realize that they don't want a hot war in their neighborhood, etc. What's your take on that?
Well, I don't think any responsible state, thinks in terms of hot wars or conflicts. Yes, China and Pakistan have a old and very valuable relationship to both countries. So whatever moves China makes will be mindful of that relationship. But at the same time, it has a very strong relationship developing with India, and I think the Chinese will know the emotional content which public opinion in India also attaches to the question of Jammu and Kashmir. So it will have to, as all other countries do, will have to craft a policy based on these two polarities.
So if you go by China's past record on India-Pakistan conflict, they have not really gone out all guns blazing in support of Pakistan or against India. So if you were to sort of extrapolate from that history, would you say that China is likely to play a balancing sort of act in this particular context in the days to come?
Well, both India and Pakistan are large countries, and in terms of size, in terms of the land area they occupy, and it also have a long history of dealing with each other. So it's not easy for other countries to balance the two in that sense. But certainly the Chinese, from what in my assessment, the Chinese have a view about these border issues, and their statements are always prefaced by the comment that these are legacies of history and should not be allowed to hold up the development of meaningful relationships in the present times. And I think this is what guides their approach vis-a-vis India where the border issue is concerned. And I presume that this would be their view also where Pakistan-India issues are concerned, that we shouldn't let issues of history muddy the waters or cloud current day realities. And in fact, this is very much what we tell the Pakistanis all the time, that yes, you have a stated political position, we have a stated political and constitutional position, but that political position should not lead you to embarking on courses of action which feels that any course of action is allowed. So, I think the use of terrorists by Pakistan to achieve political aims vis-a-vis India is something which fills the Chinese with as much concern as it does with other countries.
Let's forget about China for a moment. What kind of reaction or pressure do you expect the international community to put on India in this particular regard? The international community, for example, a certain UN organization has been publishing reports on human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir, etc., etc. So, do you see that pressure to go up, or do you see that the international community realizes that, hey, this is a domestic issue and the Indian side has to deal with it domestically?
My feeling is that most countries feel that India has to deal with this issue domestically. There is also the sense that there are institutions in India, there is public opinion in India, and there is a very much of an energetic debate on this and other issues in India. So, the scope for foreign countries to exercise, say what their opinions are on this issue is very limited, because all those issues which they would talk about are very much part of the public debate in India.
So, in the aftermath of the J&K decision, how do you think the Afghan situation is going to play out for India, given the fact that the Americans are in negotiations with the Taliban for a certain exit route from Afghanistan, and Pakistan is key in that context. Now, I'm also reading Trump's last month's tweets in this particular context. So, do you see the Pakistanis putting some pressure on the Americans to put a little pressure on India to bring India to the negotiating table on Kashmir, or do you see that that's not really going to make much of a difference?
I don't think it is going to make much of a difference, and primarily because I think this issue in terms of Pakistan trying to use whatever leverage it has with other countries to apply pressure on India is something which has had a very long history. And since 1989, we have been seeing replays of this particular equation many times over. So, I frankly don't see much direct connection of that kind of what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir with Afghanistan. There is, of course, a larger geopolitical connection, because if one goes back in history, the insurgency in Jammu and Kashmir more or less coincides with the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, and this great sense of triumphalism in Pakistan, that the template they developed in Afghanistan can be applied vis-a-vis India too. So, there is that kind of geopolitical connect, but I don't see any direct fallout of the Afghanistan negotiations having on the India-Pakistan situation.
But there's the other angle where India has certain amount of civilian investment in Afghanistan, close to $2 billion or so. So, the Pakistani deep state could potentially frustrate the Indian civilian activities in Afghanistan. That's probably the only place where they can sort of give India some pain as far as India's external engagement is concerned.
Well, I think that is where the misperception in Pakistan about Afghanistan begins. I think the biggest investment which India has in Afghanistan is in the friendship of its people, and that no amount of Pakistan activity can really curtail or erode. The lesson which Pakistan has to draw from this is that how does it invest in its own relationship with the Afghanistan people, because I don't see our investments in Afghanistan as being investments that we have to protect in some way. These were projects of goodwill, and it is really for the Afghan people to develop them and take care of them and see where do with them. They are not commercial investments which we are trying to protect. I think this is a false analogy which is often drawn, that it's like an investment which has been made by some Western power in some other country, and then it has to act geopolitically to protect those investments.
I don't disagree with you at all, but let's look at this scenario. You may have a Taliban part of the establishment in Afghanistan in the days to come, and Pakistan's relationship with Taliban is well known, and India would like to continue with its presence in Afghanistan and continue the good work that it has been doing in Afghanistan. That could definitely, at least in the near future, come under some fire. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, that is again for the Afghanistan government. Whatever architecture of that government is, it is really for the Afghanistan government to decide. I think our investments were so highly praised and were so regarded as being of such value by people in Afghanistan, because it is something which they felt they had a control over and in which they had a major stake. So, whatever we have done in Afghanistan is at the invitation of the government of Afghanistan. I don't see the situation panning out in those terms. Now, if the Taliban, as they say, has changed and it becomes part of a legitimate governmental structure in Afghanistan, I would presume that they would think on the same lines as any other government in Afghanistan has, that if people want an engagement with Indians, why should they come in the way?
Right, and Taliban is probably not a monolith. Taliban perhaps is a slightly changed sort, at least from what they were in 1996.
The fact is, if you see the nature of our relationship with Afghanistan, it has a great deal of it has to do with training, scholarships, education. Now these are things which no one objects to. So, I don't see any dramatic change of that kind happening in the short term. Now, it is true that there is a Pakistani hand. The Pakistani hand sees red with regard to anything happening in Afghanistan where India is involved. How that will play out, one has to wait and see.
A slightly different geopolitical angle. I mean, we had this vision of accessing Central Asia via Chabahar through Afghanistan to Central Asia. So, where do these developments, on the one hand you have the Americans up in arms against the Iranians, and then now the uneasiness between India and Pakistan is going to increase. That may have some impact on Afghanistan. So, where do all these developments leave that grand vision of accessing Central Asia?
Again, if we are talking specifically about the India-Pakistan situation, I don't see it having any major impact on the access to Central Asia through Chabahar, because that is something where Iran is really directly at the center of the radar. But certainly, US sanctions on Iran, US-Iran relations, the situation in the relationship of Iran with the other Gulf states, all those will have a certain bearing on what happens to the North-South corridor in larger terms. But I don't see the India-Pakistan situation or what is happening in Afghanistan having a direct bearing on that, because if one sees things objectively, things in Afghanistan have not been entirely stable for the past decade at least. But that has not stopped progress on Chabahar from taking place. The situation which is there in Chabahar right now is more related to US-Iran relations and Iran's relations with other countries in the Gulf than with factors more to the west, more to the east, I am sorry.
Right. Ambassador Raghavan, you were India's High Commissioner in Pakistan in December 2015 when Mr. Modi made that surprise visit to Lahore on his way back from Kabul. How do you describe the atmosphere at that point of time within Pakistan, within the Pakistani establishment? And why is that it did not really lead to anything really substantive?
Well, the atmosphere in my recollection was euphoric. Certainly amongst those people I was in touch with, because they all saw the visit as representing something very, very clear, which was that the Prime Minister of India was personally investing capital, his personal political capital, on the India-Pakistan relationship, and that was a very, very big thing as far as they were concerned. Now, it is true that that particular initiative did not gather much traction. But the reason for that was, again, something which is very well known, that there was a spate of terrorist attacks and the follow-up initiatives which the government of India then took were not responded to. In particular, the idea was that after the Pathankot attack, we could try to work with Pakistan to see if we can identify who was behind that particular attack. But at some stage, the Pakistanis backed off, and that process itself was related to the civil military breakdown, which was then emerging in Pakistan.
That takes me to my next question, really. Because there is criticism both within Pakistan and India that there should have been more preparations made before the visit, and because this was a surprise visit, adequate ground preparations were not done, and there was this disconnect between the establishment and Nawaz Sharif at that point of time. So, would you agree with that criticism, that one of the reasons why we didn't make much headway thereafter, although it was a very, very well intended visit, because the ground was not prepared enough?
Well, I don't agree that the ground was not prepared, because if you recall, the visit took place in December 2015, and in fact, people often overlook the fact that it was preceded by two very important meetings. Firstly, the NSAs met in Bangkok that very month, and about 2 weeks later, the External Affairs Minister of India went to Islamabad for the Heart of Asia Foreign Ministers meeting. But nevertheless, it was a visit with a great deal of bilateral content in it too.
So was the deep state on board?
Now, whether the deep state or whether the military was on board, now there are certain things about Pakistan which have never been in the control of any other external player, including India, which is the state of the civil military relationship. Now, one can argue that was it taken on board? I would say that it's not possible to take it on board. If you try to get every piece in place before you take a step, you will be immobilized. I think this question has arisen about Prime Minister Vajpayee's Lahore visit, the famous bus that was everyone on board. At that time, it appeared as if everyone was on board. What was happening internally is very difficult to decipher. And as I said, if you don't take political initiatives, and if one is bureaucratic about it, one will just be paralyzed into inaction.
You're right. The civil-military relationship in Pakistan is the wild card here, and that particular variable is simply not controllable by anybody, except if the Indian establishment were to have some discrete negotiations with, or discrete conversations with the deep state in Pakistan, back channel, discrete, complete secret, would that help?
I don't think the problem is the deep state or the military establishment in Pakistan, because that is easier to deal with. After all, we have been dealing with the military establishment in Pakistan for decades. The Indus Waters Treaty was signed when General Ayub Khan was the head of state. You had very fruitful discussions when General Musharraf was so it is not the military establishment. The problem is the breakdown in civil military ties. Now that is something which is a matter which is entirely internal to Pakistan. There is no external player which can modify that relationship, change that relationship, or influence that relationship. This is a structural problem internal to Pakistan.
In other words, you are saying that it is not the Pakistani military as a variable that's a problem. It is not the Pakistani political class as a variable that's a problem. It's the dynamics between them that creates a separate variable altogether, which is what we are finding difficult.
This is exactly the point, that India-Pakistan relations are entirely a function of the civil-military relationship in Pakistan, and which is why the relationship is prone to these wild swings, because you may be wanting to go ahead with the military and the civilians will come in the way. You may be wanting to go ahead with the civilians, but the military will come in the way. And the problem is the civilian and the military don't have a balanced relationship.
Ambassador Raghavan, wonderful talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.